Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. I think I will kick us off already so that we can stay on time for this lunch talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is really exciting, a very, very interesting topic, a very interesting panel. So we're very happy to see all of you here. And we are meeting today because Wissenschaft im Dialog is celebrating its anniversary. Wissenschaft im Dialog, the National Organization for Science Communication in Germany, is turning 25 this year. And I don't know if you remember how it was when you turned 25, but this is also a time, when people maybe start looking back on their lives, reminiscing, reflecting on the past years, maybe more so than when you're turning 15, I think. And so we thought this would be a very good opportunity to also look back on the developments in science communication, on what's been happening in these past 25 years. And this brought us to some sort of focal topic that have really accompanied not only Wissenschaft im Dialog, but science communication at large throughout these past years. And one of these topics is definitely the question of quality in science communication. And this is precisely why today we're hosting this lunch talk with one of our projects, the Impact Unit, which is the project dedicated to promoting quality in science communication. The Impact Unit is a project that has started in 2019 and is dedicated to promoting not only quality but evaluation in science communication as the best way to assess if we actually have quality in science communication in the end. So what we're going to do today is we will look at this topic of quality and evaluation from a very specific lens, which is the lens of standardization of evaluation. And we will do so with, as I said, an impressive international panel that I will introduce a bit later today. We will kick off the day with a brief welcome from Wiebke Hoffmann from the Stifterverband, one of the associates of Wissenschaft im Dialog. I will then proceed to give a very short presentation to sort of situate ourselves within this topic, and then we will begin the discussion. We have some questions prepared for our panel, but then we invite you all to ask questions, and we would ask you to post the questions in the chat, and we will then put them to the panel. So we hope we will have a lively discussion on this topic. As you can see, we are also recording the event today for all those who can't join us at the moment. As this is international as well, it might not be a convenient time for everyone. So I hope you have all been asked to consent when you entered, but this is why we're recording. So I think without further ado, I will hand off already to Wiebke, who is going to say some brief words of welcome today.
Thank you, Lillian, and hello. Welcome, everyone. Dear colleagues, dear guests, dear science communication enthusiasts. When an organization turns 25, this is a reason to celebrate, of course, and it's also a moment to look back and forward. So I guess Lillian and I had some similar thoughts on this special anniversary. And I'm very honored to, on behalf of the Stifterverband, congratulate you, Wissenschaft im Dialog, on this very special anniversary. 25 years ago, the idea behind Wissenschaft im Dialog was simple but powerful. Science should not live in an ivory tower, it should live in dialogue with society. And today, I guess we can all agree this idea is even more relevant than ever. Wissenschaft im Dialog has become the place where science, citizens, and creativity meet. And I think that creativity plays a very special role also in the field of evaluation. And I can say Germany's science communication landscape would not look the same without Wissenschaft im Dialog, and also especially without the Impact Unit with its different approaches and materials. But anniversaries are not only about looking back, they are also about asking what's next. And I guess here comes today's topic in quality and evaluation in science communication. Some may think evaluation, that sounds a bit dry, maybe even a little bit bureaucratic. But in truth, evaluation is our compass. It tells us if our communication really works. And this is also recognized politically. For example, the Factory Viscom initiative of the German federal government, in which Wissenschaft im Dialog also plays a very crucial role, made it very clear. If we want science communication to strengthen trust and participation, we must evaluate its quality and impact systematically. I probably do not tell you anything new when I say without evaluation, we count outputs, but with evaluation, we really try to understand impact. And that's the difference. Evaluation shows us whether we just created an activity or real impact. And I'm very much looking forward to the upcoming discussion with all those very interesting guests from various backgrounds and countries who will give us more insights and perspectives on the topic of especially standardization of evaluation. But let's look ahead. What do we, especially as Stifterverband, wish for? We wish for the next 25 years of Wissenschaft im Dialog. We guess that they will be shaped not only by new formats and new technologies, but we hope that above all by collaboration and strong alliances. Collaboration between science and society, between institutions and citizens, and also hopefully between all of us in this room here today. At Stifterverband, we strongly believe science communication and public engagement need to even get stronger. And for this, we need to collaborate to strengthen science communication strategically and systematically. So let us raise our virtual glasses to 25 years of Wissenschaft im Dialog, to the courage to ask new questions and form new powerful alliances, and to the commitment to always evaluate what truly matters, how science can inspire, empower, and connect people, and in my opinion, more important than ever, how science communication can contribute to strengthening our democracy and the resilience of our society. Thank you very much and happy anniversary, Wissenschaft im Dialog.
Thank you very much, Wiebke. Thank you for the congratulations, which I'm receiving instead of Wissenschaft im Dialog. And thank you also for, getting us on the journey for our discussion today, which I think we will jump right into. And I will do that by kicking us off with a little input presentation where I will outline the topic that we will talk about today and give you a bit of context why we also decided to look specifically at standardization. And I think what Wiebke just said already helps in understanding this because we want to look a bit to the future. And I think standardization is one of the possible ways that we might go when we want to ensure quality in science communication. So I will now try to share my screen. Hopefully successfully. I think this looks good. So I will talk about standards for the evaluation of science communication. And this is not a topic that we sort of just invented out of thin air, but it comes from a multi-stage analysis that we did in our project Impact Unit around 1.5 years ago, I think. And our idea was to look to the future of evaluation and ask, where should we go? What is needed? Where do we need to do to put in more work in order to promote science communication in the future and especially evaluation in the future? And to find this out, we relied on help from experts. And we specifically conducted 5 different roundtables, online roundtables, with experts from different groups. We talked to science communication practitioners, we talked to professional evaluation experts, we talked to researchers, to people in leadership position in key science communication institutions, and we talked to funders. This all, I have to say, in the German context, which will lead us up to why we're doing this lunch talk today. So this was purely in a German context. We synthesized all the input and ideas from the groups, gave them back to the experts, and then came to a final publication that will be posted in the chat as well, in German, unfortunately. But for all those who want to check this out, this is freely available. So what we did was we came to a couple of fields of action, as we called them, where more work was needed in order to promote and improve evaluation of science communication. And here you can see the fields of action that we identified. So creating a common culture and understanding of evaluation was very important. Standardization, wink, wink. So this is why we're here today. Roles and responsibilities in evaluation of science communication, capacity building, network establishment, and also, of course, the ever-present topic of funding and resources. So let's specifically look at standardization because this is what we want to talk about today. And I think for us, when we listen to the discussions, and mind you, we did never tell any of these expert groups to talk specifically about standardization, but this was something that emerged from almost all group discussions. So this idea of could we somehow standardize what we're doing? Could we find a common way of doing evaluation in science communication was very present in all expert groups without any prompts to do so. But what we saw was that there were very different ideas of what this could actually mean. And it began with what do we talk about when we say standard? What would a standard contain or entail? Do we mean tools? Would it be a standard of sort of best practice materials and resources that everyone should use when evaluating? Should it be standardized methods, so qualitative and quantitative methods or mixed methods? Should it be a standard of instruments, so specific validated and pre-tested instruments such as survey scales or interview guides or pre-post designs, so where everyone could say, I'm using these standardized methods to evaluate? Or indicators? Are people actually talking about qualitative or quantitative indicators that are standardized across all projects of science communication when they evaluate? Or the same benchmarks? Would we mean fixed outcomes and expectations for specific projects? Would that be standardized so that projects either live up or do not live up to this standard? And then what we also found very interesting, and I hope we will get to discuss today as well, was that there were basically two ideas of what a standard could be. And one is what we sort of internally termed the gold standard. So this would be a standard, an ideal typical standard that serves more as an orientation. So it would be valid for all projects, no matter what context, what size, what kind of project. It would be ideally scientific standards, so you would have control groups and experiments and survey scales, and everything would be very, very scientifically founded. You would triangulate multiple methods to structured sampling. And it would be very clear that no project actually needs to conform to the standard, but it would still be the standard they all aspire to. So it would more be an orientation than something to actually fully implement in each project. And then the other option, the sort of flexible solution, would be more of a modular approach to standardization. So it wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all standard, but there would rather be different standards for different project contexts or sizes or budgets or staff capacity. So this would be a very multi-layered standard composed of different blocks or modules that each project could combine depending on their capacity. So standard procedures that would be applicable in all different projects. And this makes a huge difference, the way that we understand this. And I think how to go about creating these standards would be very different depending on what route we choose. What we also saw that there are very different ideas of why people want to standardize. There's different interests of why people think standards would be good. Practitioners, for example, usually like to standardize because they can then compare themselves to other projects, have inspiration, draw inspiration from other people's work, maybe adapt themselves and make changes. Scientists like standardization because then they get comparable data from different projects and they can conduct more large-scale analysis than they can if every project does their evaluations differently. And funders like to compare projects to make funding decisions. So they would ideally want to very, very quickly see which project is successful or not to then take a funding decision. So interests really differ, driving this move towards standardization. And there's also different ideas about who should actually be involved in standardizing? So should it be the practitioners, because they're those who are impacted by the standard, because they need to apply these evaluation standards in their projects? Or should it be the scientists, because they actually know how to conduct research, so they are knowledgeable enough to inform the creation of a solid standard? Or should it be the funders? Because in the end, they're the ones who have the expectations, and they're the ones who set the outer standards for projects to perform, to be successful, to be further funded. So controlling and implementation is key. Is a standard binding? Is it optional? Is there a penalty if someone doesn't apply the standard? Who can sanction it? Who should be responsible? So you see, there's still a lot of open questions. Um, and I just briefly, because we're very grateful, want to show the names of all the experts who have contributed in their discussions to all these fields of action and to informing also our understanding of the future of evaluation. But I mostly now want to say, let's discuss this, because we can see that this is not finished. There's a lot of open questions, and I reiterate this. This was a German context study. So this is really what, made us think and drove us to opening up this lunch talk today to international perspectives, because it might be that this is also a very German-focused idea, and that this whole idea of standardization just isn't an issue in other national contexts. Or maybe other countries are so much farther advanced than we are, and we can really learn something from comparing our perspectives. And so this is why we are here today. And we're so glad to have this really interesting panel, but also have all of you as participants who can maybe also share your experiences and the thoughts you have on standardization of evaluation. So this is all from my side to, draw you a sort of a picture of what we're talking about today. And now I would like to introduce our panel and invite them to give a brief opening statement outlining on what the state of evaluation currently is in their national context, and maybe what they view as important developments or challenges. And I would like to start by introducing Ako Olesk, who is a senior researcher in science communication at Tallinn University in Estonia. And Ako, please give us some insights on evaluation in Estonia.
Hello, everybody. So I'm here mostly as a representative of
You're
the.
very hard to hear. Can you
Sorry.
turn up the microphone, maybe?
Is that better?
No, unfortunately not. Sorry.
Okay. Let me. Maybe I can hand over to someone else and try
Yes,
to
sure.
work on the
I will come
microphone.
back to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I will now then hand over to our next panelist, which is Giulia Rizzo, Head of Science Communication at the Limburg Research Center in Italy. So, Giulia, if you would like to jump in and give us a little insights.
Yes, hello everyone. Just to put myself into context, Limburg Research Center is the Center for Applied Research in Agriculture and Food Technology in South Tyrol. And I lead a team of 7 people. And we are, our goal is to raise awareness of the institution among citizens and to highlight the relevance of scientific research in the agri-food sector. And talking about evaluation from a practitioner's point of view, and is that, as far as I know, there is no internal standards and no standards between research institutions in the region of South Tyrol in the north of Italy. Now I see there are also other Italian participants. Maybe we can get some insights on national level, but in the region in South Tyrol, I talked as well to other institutions, and there is no internal standard. This make this topic so very valuable and interesting for us practitioners. And I identified 2 major challenges for us, and there are time and workload. This is a very big challenge. I mean, we focus very much on deliver outputs. We jump from one video to the other, from social media post to the other, and adding evaluation for every activity on top of this, this feels often overwhelming for us. And the other challenge is the lack of knowledge, training, and evaluation culture among the whole team. I think it's so important that the whole team and the whole institution is on the same page when we talk about evaluation. And there is long road to that, to come to this point, I guess. And so thank you at this point to Wissenschaft im Dialog to carry out these very important discussions and topics. So this is from my
Thank
side.
you very much. And this already shows also something that we saw in our analysis in the German context of how connected the different fields of action are, because now you mentioned also training and capacity building, and of course all of this feeds into each other. Thank you very much. I will then hand it over to Mike Schäfer, Professor of Science Communication at the University of Zurich in Switzerland.
Yes, good afternoon. I can connect well, I think, to what Julia has said, because I think the Swiss situation is very similar, as far as I can see, not for the global context as it was announced here, but certainly for a couple of countries in the European countries. My impression is that the lofty aspirations are actually quite similar across different countries, similar to what Wiebke Hofmann has outlined early on. So if you ask people, science communicators, scientists, etc., they do widely also value evaluation. They see it as important for individual and organizational learning. They see it as important for accountability, for improving what they do, etc., etc. Thing is, it's often not done in a very ambitious way. It's often not done full stop. And if it's done, Julia has said that, and that's very typical to what I see also in many contexts here in Switzerland, is we go for easy output measures, essentially. We count news clippings, we count website visits, social impressions on socials, etc., things that are easy to measure. What is called outcomes in the literature. So short-term actual impacts, or even long-term actual impacts, what's called impacts also in the literature, is much less often done. And there's a number of systematic reasons for that also. We've done a small study on communicators from 4 different countries. And across countries and across organizational types also, you see similar hurdles. It's time, it's resources, it's lack of training, it's often also not organizational demand for deeper evaluation. So one of the Swiss interviewees said, well, the way our organization wants us to do it, it's pretty much impossible to actually measure who we are reaching and what we are changing. So, and that's organizationally driven. And that has to be taken seriously, of course. There's the, what you also showed, Lilian, there's the aspirations that the gold standard should have, right? Do it holistically, mix methods, do it not just in the end as a summative evaluation, do it from the start, have it integrated in the process of the project. So it's a formative evaluation, of course, but we all know that's not possible for everybody in every organization at every point in time. So I think, and I'll close with that probably, I think the interesting challenge is how to navigate this minefield in a way. So when to do it in what way, when to choose to do something more ambitious because it's a strategic project here, and when to scale down, and when also to leave room for creativity, for example. And I think this navigation, that's the important part. And I'm probably more in the gold standard box that you showed there. So I think that there should be clear standards, acknowledging that they can't always be achieved. They're an orientation. And the question is, how can we do that? Where can we do that? How can we best approximate that?
Thank you very much. This will be interesting to come back to in the discussion, I think. But for now, I will hand over to Mikkel Bohm, who is the director of Astra in Denmark.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you so much for this initiative, because I think this is something that everyone struggles with a lot, and we need to find the right way of doing it. And I think my bottom line is we need to talk, and no matter how we arrange how much we make a to talk, we need to reflect. So this initiative that you have taken is excellent, and keep it up, please, because we need to talk more than this. So in Denmark, we struggle with exactly the same dilemmas as the former speakers talked about. I work with science communication, so I work within the formal education system. We're the National Science Education Center in Denmark, works with the ministry. And of course, we want to show results. We want to show what it works. And already here is the first obstacle, but because what do we mean by it works? So what works for whom under what circumstances is the big question. And of course, the outcomes on the long term is very, very hard. And then I think we run into problems, our own capacities and resources and funding and so on. And perhaps we should make a division of work that practitioners should do the outcomes because you really need to work on a long scale. We've had an initiative in Denmark, a private initiative that works now with a number of the big funders in Denmark, the big private foundations, to try to make a web-based reporting system. It's called Found Good. So everybody who's a grant holder will report into that, and it's possible to take out data across. But of course, to what is the detail level of it. And I think another thing I want to say now is that it's very important to think this from the start and not make unrealistic goals when you apply for funding, when you start your project. It's so tempting to say we can change the world with this project, and the truth is that you're not changing it. You're maybe not even changing what you intended to change. Maybe you're changing something else. So it's also a matter of culture to set realistic goals and think about evaluation the minute you write the application from the beginning. I think would be my takeaway message. So yeah, that's all for Denmark.
Thank you very much. I think your internet connection is a little unstable. I don't know if you want to maybe use the other speaker's introduction to check if you can have access to maybe a different
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in a hotel in Stockholm.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to alert you to that. Thank you very much for the insights. We were able to hear everything you said, I think. Then I will hand off to Kenneth Fung, who is Senior Lecturer, the Department of Science and Technology Studies at the University of Malaya in Malaysia.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. It's dinner time over here, so it's not a lunchtime talk for me. I'm actually teaching in the Masters of Science Communication and Public Engagement program here at University of Malaya that's just been launched 2 years ago. Aside from that, we have also been approached by our Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation in Malaysia as consultants to run the very first evaluation study for science, technology, innovation, what we call here enculturation, which is essentially communication. And that is a project that has just been started in May and will last until next year. So just some insight into what's happening on the other side of the world. Malaysia, we released the National Science and Technology Innovation Policy in somewhere in 2018, with a view of somewhere in 2030 we should be a very advanced science and technology driven country. It's now 2025, and we're actually doing our very first attempt at measuring quality in science communication. So interestingly, I will not say too much about that. But the idea here is that this is just a step forward in the way science communication is being being presented or being discussed in the region. And we feel that this is an opportune time for us to learn some best practices. And this is a place where standardization actually helps a lot of countries that are sort of up and coming in this area, because it points us in the right directions. It helps us to learn from the mistakes from other countries, and also helps us to sort of make decisions based on sort of, in a sense, expert views that we can learn from, and in a sense that we can actually catch up a lot quicker. So I think that's essentially my takeaway from this point. Very happy to be here and very happy to be invited to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're so glad you're here with us today at this dinner talk, as you said. So then let's try again with Ako. I hope we
Yes,
can
can
hear
you
you
hear me
now.
better now?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm not sharing the experiences of Estonia today. I'm rather representing the international consortium that is building the European Competence Center for Science Communication. So this is the COLEST project. And I came to this project with a background of developing quality indicators for science communication. There was another Horizon Europe project called Quest, and we used the stakeholder engagement sessions to develop these indicators. Basically, we asked stakeholders, what do you think good science communication is? And the key takeaway there was that everyone presented very qualitative indicators. So the framework, quality framework that we ended up with is very qualitative. So it's not essentially an evaluation tool, but rather a self-reflection tool and a teaching tool that can be used. When we started the Coalesce project, we wanted to take the same approach and to develop quality criteria for science communication resources. So all the materials out there that are meant to help people doing science communication. And again, doing those stakeholder engagement sessions, we actually found that people became almost allergic to the word quality. And they felt that using the word quality is starting to label people and resources into what is quality and what is not quality. And they thought it was not appropriate because they felt that kind of all the activities have a value of their own. They're just valuable in kind of in different or very specific contexts. So a measure for everything cannot be good because it kind of dismisses certain qualities. So therefore, we kind of reframed it not as quality criteria, but principle standards and criteria for science communication resources, where we define standards as reference model that are used as general rules to measure quality and value of science communication resources. And currently in that project, we are working on developing a self-evaluation tool for science communication practitioners. And there we have taken this approach of uh, understanding what the user needs and guiding them to some existing resources that are out there. Because when we look out there, there is a lot of material about evaluation of science communication. However, looking at these existing resources, we see that kind of there are kind of certain patterns there. We see that those resources tend to focus on public engagement projects and especially on project type of activities. You do something, you evaluate it, and that's it. We see that there is a great expectation on self-evaluation. So you do it, you evaluate it, and we might have a discussion whether this is a sensible way of doing things better. Maybe there are kind of other models that could support evaluation. And we also see that those resources, as Mike also mentioned, focus a lot on outputs and sometimes on outcomes, but very little on impact. So this is kind of there are certain gaps in those existing resources. So we can discuss whether we can fill those gaps and what are those actual gaps out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for these insights. I think we already see a lot of interesting overlaps, and especially now, Ako, to hear from this European context is really, really interesting because this is already giving an insight into how to come together in a very diverse context with lots of different interests. So I think we can start in the discussion, and maybe, Kenneth, I would like to ask you first. So you all referred a bit back also to what I talked about in the presentation. You know, we see the sort of gold standard, we see the more flexible standard, and I would be really interested in your perspective now that, you know, you're also tasked with conducting this first evaluation, what your sort of real-time view on standardization is. Do you think that you could work well with a gold standard, or do you think now from your experience, more flexible standards would be more helpful?
Yeah, I'm thinking at a national sort of perspective. A gold standard is always, in a sense, something that the funders would always be looking for because they would like to have something for them to benchmark against. And typically we are dealing with economists who are in our funding streams. So essentially, they're always looking for, very robust indicators that have been very well validated and things like that. So those are the aspects that they're looking for. But with science communication, as what Arco was saying, a lot of times there's a lot of pushback from a lot of science communication in the science communication field to say that a lot of our work is actually very qualitative in nature, and it's very difficult for us to really make these kind of comparisons. So I think there needs to be some kind of middle ground that we need to consider, where, in a sense, like what you were mentioning, Lillian, about more of a modular, a more flexible sort of a model, that could make a lot more sense, considering the fact that resources are not exactly, equally distributed in a lot of times, as well as the fact that, as capacity is something that we are dealing with over here as well. There's a huge inequality when it comes to capacity, especially between urban and rural settings, the way that it's being delivered and the kind of resources that are available. So I think these are sort of the aspects that need to be taken into consideration when we think about how do we deploy something at a national level that is supposed to, in a sense, um, sort of stand the test of time and also
Mm-hmm.
be able to be sort of adapted into different type of settings. I think that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mikkel, directly jumping in.
Yeah, I think I agree very much to that. And what I was thinking is who has the responsibility to conduct if we really want to do this gold standard, the long term, the impact, the real stuff. Who has the responsibility? Is it the practitioners they should build it into the applications? Will the funders pay for it? Will the practitioners have the qualifications to do so? Or you could turn it around and say it's actually the funders' interest. If they run a program with a number of projects going, maybe they should take the initiative to make across the projects to make a impact evaluation. I often talk to funders about this, and there are a lot of different opinions on that. Some are very active themselves, and they have the evaluation skills and the capacities in a big private foundation to do so. And others, they say you need to evaluate. And then when we say, well, you're looking at 20% of the total cost of this project, then they say, no, 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 that's far too much. So we're struggling with some dilemmas here. I think who has the responsibility and are they willing to pay?
Yes, thank you very much. I think, Mike, you already said it yourself, and I also wanted to pinpoint you because you were quite a strong supporter of the gold standard in our roundtables. How would you respond to these concerns?
I don't think this is a contradiction, to be honest. It's the gold standard is an aspiration or an orientation. And also, even your presentation, Lilian, I would not say it's two different understandings of standards. I would say it's the goal or the aspiration and the practice. Having a gold standard does not mean not acknowledging limitations, lack of resources, lack of support by funders, etc., and the necessity maybe even to deviate from gold standards in certain way and certain specific settings and projects. That's not a contradiction, I think. But having something that you know you want to achieve and that will still have multiple what quality is. Arco acknowledged that. There's different understandings of quality. There's different target groups. It won't be gold standard does not mean one goal, one size fits all for every scientific. Doesn't make sense for every project. That's not what we mean. What I mean by gold standard is more, on the one hand, it's on a meta level. So if you do any kind of project, tell me what your goals are. Tell me what you would like to achieve. Tell me what your target group is, so I can have a sense at least of what you wanted to do, and you can also have a sense of did it work or not. And it has to be able to show failure also. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in every field of life, when I do research, some things go really well, and some things I really fuck up. And that's quite normal. And that's gonna happen in science communication as we do have fuck up nights and things like that. And it makes sense to have them because things do go wrong. And evaluations, if they're done properly, have to be able to show that. So having an evaluation that ends up with saying everything is kind of right for it's just very specific, doesn't make sense, I think. So you need this kind of, and it will still be multiple again, and multiple goals, etc. But you need this orientation, I think. I can't imagine it doing any evaluation without that, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Julia, what's your perspective also from a practitioner's point of view? I mean, you talked about lack of time and the pressures of the job. Is that something that you think you would be able to work with, or that would put additional pressure on, an already quite stressful job?
Yeah, as I said, we live in a period there's a lack of evaluation culture. So this would be a great point to start with something to have a gold standard to golden rules to apply to. So I think it should be yes, a guideline, but also flexible because there are so many different contexts, so many different realities. And there should be a difference between evaluation of, I guess someone of you already said that, maybe Arco, between a project that has a beginning and an end, a very clear beginning and an end, and ongoing activities. They are much more complex to evaluate. And so guidelines, golden rules to follow are surely a very good start to let this evaluation culture grow in I'm talking about my region, but I
Yeah.
think it's the same situation in many other lands.
Yeah, thank you. And Arko, I did want to come back to you as well, because what Mike just said was a bit of also a provocation into your direction. I think, if we become too qualitative, will we end up just saying everything's great because everyone's special? So how would you respond to that?
I think we need to separate two levels of standards. I think one of them is a very technical level. So it is the level that if I want to evaluate and I use, let's say, focus groups, or if I use surveys, what are the technical standards of doing that properly? And I think most of the kind of existing resources really support practitioners in that. And I think that they come from the sense that people are lacking this technical knowledge of actually how to do those things properly. The other level is, and I think we really need to talk about this, the gold standard of why are we doing science communication? So in those resources, again, I don't see much discussion about what are our aims. And this is a simple example. If we do a excellent methodological evaluation on a project that is very deficit model project, does that really help science communication? So kind of these, let's call it the gold standard or the standardization or this discussion about aims of science communication is something that is all often missing in that discussions that we are having.
Yes, yeah. I'm very glad that you said that. It's also something we always try to point out in the project, that that quality has a strategic and a normative dimension. And I can have a project that is normatively of very high quality, but doesn't accomplish its high quality objectives at all. Or I can have a project that's very good at accomplishing its objectives, but they are normatively of low quality. And these, of course, exist side by side.
Can I have a
Yes,
short
Mike,
question?
please.
What's a project of high normative quality vis-a-vis a project of low normative quality?
I think this is what Ako was referring to. If in the community we have a common idea of what we think are good aims of science communication, and a project that is good is one that has these aims. So, for example, to engage with the public on an eye level. And then everyone who would have this aim would be of high normative quality. And if you don't reach that, you would be of low strategic quality. But if then instead, if we all agree that it's a very bad aim to want to convince people of certain policy decisions, and that is your aim, then that would be a normatively low quality project. I think this is how I would summarize this. This would be the sort of two dimensions, which of course makes the question of standard a very different one. Yeah.
And maybe just 2 sentences on that. And in other fields where quality is assessed, like for example, journalism research, they have this bifurcation of orientations towards quality. Essentially, if you want to say the senders and the audiences side. Your example was very much the sender side, right? So we decide what's good quality or not. But there is the audience side as well, right? And they may find things good and fruitful and suitable and adaptable for their lives that we may find normatively inferior. So there's another level, I think, to that.
Yes. Yeah, it's very important. Does anyone else want to jump in on this? Yes, Mikkel, please.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we try to work with theories of change when we evaluate. It's a way to maybe make it life a little bit easier for ourselves. So based on our experience and based on research, we make some assumptions that we formulate into a theory of change, that if we do this, we will probably have this outcome because we have seen that beforehand, and then we measure that activity. And we don't need to measure maybe the outcome once more because we have other studies saying that if you do this, then you probably end up with that. And I'm just curious if some of your colleagues, if you work with that method as well, sort of to try to formulate an ideal picture, our theory of change. Is that the same as you talked about, Lilian, with the normative values?
Yes, so I think from the German context, I know that there are quite some practitioners who are working with theories of change. So I think this is something that's also being used in science communication. I don't know, Julia, you wanted to jump in anyway, so maybe you can also say something to that.
I wanted to underline something that Mike has said, that it's very important to see the audience point of view. Maybe the aim is very much, it's more simple, just that the message reaches the audience, not to have any change of idea. And this could also be a very good science communication activity. The information reached out, and then it doesn't have to have a further impact. So is this high quality or low quality in your from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think this is really important, how to incorporate audience perspectives, and to also, I think this also leads us a bit to the next block of questions I wanted to address, on who needs to be at the table when we talk about standardization. And this, of course, would also include audiences. I mean, should audiences be at the table when we talk about standardization and about quality? But Akko, I will hand over to you gladly.
Yes, so I was thinking about again what the point that Mike made, thinking about the audience perspective, which is really important. At the same time, we know that science communication is in fact political in the sense that its main ideas are driven by certain societal needs or societal problems, and much of the science communication is built around trying to solve a certain problem, and definition of that problem is always, political in the sense that it's people who come together and decide what do we need to solve, and kind of the evaluation in that perspective, what we consider good or not that good science communication is also in relation to those, let's call them political aims that we have as societies have given science communication. And we know from social media studies that not everything that people find good is actually good for themselves and good for the society. So I think this tension there is always something to consider. So what are the kind of the levels of happiness or quality that we think about?
Thank you. Kenneth, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with what Arco is saying. I think I spend a lot of time in China these days, and they're still running on the whole science popularization concept, where a lot of their science communication is done with the intention to essentially push national agendas in science and technology development. So they're pushing the space program, they're pushing their high tech and that kind of thing. And that's the same across Asia Pacific generally. If you go to Japan, South Korea, if you go to various parts of Southeast Asia, generally that's the direction of science and technology communication. The interest is actually to push for more students in STEM fields in order to push for more human capital in STEM disciplines. And so that's basically a political play in a sense. It's very deficit model driven. So introducing a theory of change sort of concept into this sort of foundation it takes a little bit of it takes a little bit of a learning curve. And I think this is probably a good reason why we should have this conversation to talk about how can we really transition the old method of thinking from a very deficit model driven into a more theory of change driven sort of paradigm. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with the latter part, but I wanted to a bit challenge the further part and also Arko's comment. In a way, couldn't it be that this perspective, it's politically charged topics, etc., that's part of, we look at this from the sender's perspective. And the China example really drives this point home. We look at this from the sender's perspective. Many people, when they encounter what they consider science, it's not going to be gravitational waves. It may not even be things like climate change and the big topics we all think about when we think about science communication. It's going to be the protein drink after I go to the gym. Is this really working? Can I drink a glass of wine? How does my Fitbit actually work? Should I send my 3-year-old daughter to school? It's everyday life problems that they deal with, and that science actually has something to say about. And you can still say, of course, that is political if you have a very, very broad understanding of what is political. But these are the things I think that many people are actually concerned with, are actually motivated to get good information and a good partner to have a dialogue with on. And these are also the people that often, when we do science communication projects, we think about not enough, not strongly enough. And also when we do evaluation, they have to be at the table, I think. Otherwise, we do evaluations and science communication projects in a way for the choir, for the converted, for the ones that are already very have a strong affinity for science to begin with.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this again reflects that there's just very different interests and motivations in, why to standardize and what would be the effect of standardization. But Julia, I think you wanted to say something to that.
Yes, I want to give this example. The question, does our research have an impact on the agriculture in South Tyrol? This is not a question we are answering because our researchers have a direct connection with the stakeholders, in our case, the farmers or the food industry. So the results and if the research has a real impact, they answer it directly with the stakeholder. Our goal, our work as science communication team in the institution is another one, is to convey this information to the public, to citizens. And this is an audience that is very much harder to reach. You need extra effort for this. And this is a very big challenge to convey.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. So one thing I was wondering about in connection now that we're talking about, who should be at the table, who are we doing this for, who decides what constitutes good quality, is who enforces this. And I would be very interested in your perspective. So imagine that there would be standards. Would it be the funders who have sanctioning mechanisms through, of course, their funding schemes that they have, or practitioners, practitioner associations? So how do you think once there would be a standard, should this be enforced, and if so, how? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Mikkel, I think maybe you could say something to that.
Well, maybe I'm not really sure if we used to say the right word when we say standards. Maybe because there are so many ways. Maybe it's good, informed, and transparent practice we should talk about instead. Because standard is like you put something on a formula and then you can take it across. But I think in your presentation, standards covered a lot more than that. It covered a lot of different methods, and to be reflective about those methods and be transparent about those methods, and maybe even be transparent about some of the what you call it. The methods that don't work very well, or the failures you have made on the way. So if somebody should sanction some standards, my fear would be, or enforce it, my fear would be that we end up with something very mechanical, very primitive, too little detail and too little talk, and we get empty figures out of it. I would much rather have that the funders could, and some funders do that very well in Denmark. They invite people who had gotten grants for them to meetings, to exchange experiences, try to create an open and comfortable environment where you can be honest about your failures, as somebody said earlier. So standards should be more about transparency, in my view, than just primitive methods. I'm sure that's not what you mean, but maybe standards, it's a little bit wrong in my ears.
So this would be more about common values rather than about a standardized procedure of
Yeah,
evaluation,
common
so to
values
speak.
and openness and transparency and debate and dialogue about it. So we did this, and then we measured it this way. We tried this method, and we found out this, and this is how we went in dialogue with the audience, and so on and so forth. So it's, yeah, standards. It's a little bit mechanical.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm very surprised to see Mike nodding, because I would have thought that you're sort of more of the defender of standardized procedures, scientific measures, validated methods.
No,
But
but that's I think exactly what Mikkel was talking about. That's not my understanding of where I would like to have standards here. I would like to have, not everybody has to use the same measures or the same indicators, etc., etc. It has to be appropriate to a project, yes. But we should agree that we should be transparent about the goals of the projects and what we want to achieve. And they should be formulated in a way that they are, in principle, that they can be assessed with something like an evaluation, for example. And I mean, partly also, I think the danger is letting the perfect be the enemy of the good here. We are miles away from a situation where things in science communication and evaluations of science communication is becoming too standardized. The problem is rather that A, we don't have evaluations often, and B, they're highly unstandardized. And the methods that we use are essentially, I don't know, calculators, essentially counting news articles and likes on websites. And there's great other examples out there, I know, and people will criticize me in the comments, and rightly so, because I overemphasize here. But that's where we are. And we are way miles away from the other end of the spectrum here. So I really wouldn't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. I think having more clarity about things, agreeing that evaluations are necessary and that funders, for example, should push maybe a little for that. Agreeing that if it can be done, having a holistic approach, not just a summative evaluation, is better than just a summative evaluation. Having both quantitative and qualitative indicators in most cases will probably be better than just having one of them,
I see.
etc. That's what I'm talking about. And that's also why I think it's an orientation. I'm aware that this can't be achieved everywhere, of course. And maybe last sentence, I mean, there's different conceptions of sanctions, right? And we will never be at a point here where we will have legal, regulatory, strong sanctions, most likely. We are talking essentially social agreements and guidelines and stuff. And if you look in other fields, that's also the way in which evaluation frameworks, et cetera, usually are formulated. It's social nudging in a way, organizational nudging. And if we can agree on that, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Mikkel.
I just had this thought that I've been thinking about this a lot, that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves by these big evaluation ambitions we have. What if we said that science communication is a cultural enterprise, like a lot of other things, like a music concert or an art gallery or something? Are they really under the same evaluation pressure as us? Science is a cultural phenomenon, as is art and as is sports. But do you really have the same evaluation pressure if you get a lot of funding for a big museum that you should evaluate what the audience take home and how you have changed the minds of the audience and this and that? It just seems that science communication, as somebody else said, is much more political, is much more from a center's perspective. Now and the deficit model that we're still struggling with. Now we have to teach the public about this, and I don't see the same mechanism when it comes to art and music and sports. Why do we have this pressure in science communication?
Ako, you have looked a lot at science communication and quality with many different stakeholders. Would you maybe want to answer to that?
I think there's also a point about semantics. I think these words like quality, standards, enforcement, they will create resistance within the community, because I think the community itself sees itself more as a creative community, than rather than kind of something that can be kind of put into boxes. So yes, maybe thinking about different ways to talk about all of this, as Mikkel was also pointing out. So I think they all want to know whether their work has meaning. And this is essentially what we are talking about when we are evaluating whether this work has, in the end, meaning. And there are tools that can help with that, but there are some semantics that are not really helpful. And another point regarding the kind of the enforcement that you mentioned, I think there's a fear within the community that kind of the major players, the one with most resources, like the funders, the universities, will start to determine, what are the standards of evaluation, and kind of narrowing the definition to a level where kind of those smaller projects or individual practitioners do not fit these frameworks, and sense being left out. So this is also something to really think about.
Yeah. That's also something we definitely see in the German community, that this is a real fear. Kenneth?
Yeah, I think this is to circle back to the earlier question. I think this is the part where the community really has to play a large role as a major stakeholder in determining all of this. Because I think I like the idea of having to look at it instead of standards, to look at it more as a commons. And I think that having a common sort of perspective sort of gives everyone the sort of independence to do their own thing. But at the same time, if we have some certain values that we sort of aspire to, or certain gold standards that we're sort of, in a sense, nudging towards, that kind of gives us an idea of what direction we should go towards.
Mm.
So with that in mind, I think that really is pretty helpful in the current context of what I'm seeing in my country, at least. And then I think that for those countries that are still in the process of developing, I think that could also act as a way to kind of include them despite their lack of resources, or despite their lack of capacity. And I think that could be something that, we could sort of work towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is maybe a good time now to open for questions from the audience. And I'm now looking at my colleague, who's also called Julia, to see whether there are any questions from the chat.
Yes, we have a very lively discussion in the chat. Please feel very free to contribute to that. I would like to start with a question which circles back to the discussion we very briefly had about the different phases of evaluation. And we have one question about if the standards guidelines probably make sense, particularly for the output. And what about the outcome or even the impact? And the question is the impact more or less mainly important for the planning of your science communication and maybe not so important for the evaluation? I would also be very interested about what our panel says to that question. Who wants to answer?
Mike?
Because I look so thoughtful.
Because you unmuted yourself.
Yeah,
That
no,
was a huge
I was
indicator.
not sure I fully understood the question. I think if in evaluations research, there is this idea of if you design a project, you should design it from the end forward. So you should have an idea of what the impact and maybe the outcomes want to be of the project and then design the actual project. So in that sense, I think thinking about that in order to not just achieve some middle goals or some low-hanging fruit, but the actual thing you wanted to achieve, that's important. I'm not sure standardization has to only apply to outputs. That was the point, right? I mean, outcomes is things like short and midterm, I don't know, changes in perceptions and attitudes, for example, or in trust, etc. Not sure, or in willingness to engage with scientists or talk about it at the dinner table. I'm not sure why the standardization issue should apply less there, but maybe somebody else has an idea.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe Mikkel, you wanted to talk about this because I think it fits into the theory of change models that you were speaking about, where obviously impacts also play a big role.
Yeah, because impact is your selling point when you make an application. We want to change this. We want to engage more local people in the city planning, or we do this or that. We want to that people around our laboratory should be more informed. We want to whatever. So that is your point when you make the application, and that is the hard thing. The easy thing is to see how many hits did you have on your website and all the outputs. That's the easy thing. But in order to make that claim that you can actually change that, you must demonstrate how you will measure it. And then and this is something that the funders should look. I do some reviewing on some international research councils' communication activities, and it's almost always missing. We will do this and that, but we are not going to state how we will measure. They only state output measures and not outcome and impact, because that is a hard thing. And this is, and again, if we could use a different word than standard, this is something that we should discuss a lot more, and this is something that funders should be a lot more critical about, and maybe be a little bit more overbearing, because you almost never reach the goals that you state. And the funders should be open to an open discussion to say, okay, we found something else out, but not exactly what we had planned, and then let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Julia Rizzo. I was wondering if you wanted to maybe say something about how you feel about this from your perspective, how easy or hard it is to formulate impacts, or what would help you or your colleagues in actually knowing how to assess whether you have had the impact that you wanted to have.
Yes, as I said before, this is very, very difficult because reaching wide publics, all the citizens, because we don't have very narrow activity, we want to reach a very broad public. It is very difficult, and you need additional resources, additional effort to do that. And we can't do that to be honest, for every activity we run in our institution. It's much easier if you apply for a project. So you can plan it, you can strategically write a project, as Mike says, from the impact question, what do we want to reach, back to how do we want to reach that. And for practitioners' daily work, this is very ambitious and very, very difficult. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Are there more questions from the chat?
Yes, two kind of more practical questions, which I think fit very well together. One person would be interested to know which measurements are already used in the evaluation of science communication. And another question which fits very well is a question about practical advice for evaluating materials that are out of the creator's hands. For example, educational comics or stories, unlike hands-on activities where you work directly with people, or unlike exhibitions where people come in person. So while there can be links to evaluation surveys, for example, in the comic book, or in the story, very few people actually submit the survey. So maybe there are some insights on how to tackle these questions.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. I'm looking to see, does anyone want to maybe say something about what do we know about the methods that are already in use? Does anyone have maybe a good overview? Ako, yes.
Not a perfect overview, but just to make a small advertisement that within the Competence Center, there will be a section on our website or platform that is called the SciComm Toolbox, which gathers relevant resources for different topics, and evaluation will be one of the topics. So hopefully, during this year, we will be able to release this evaluation toolbox, which gathers some of those resources. And then looking around, I really see that there are already some very thorough materials that introduce you all of those methods and are also very transparent about the resources that are required to use those methods.
Yes, thank you very much. I can add a bit of self-advertisement. The impact unit, at least for the German community, also has lots of tools on evaluation, which give you sort of introductions into different kind of methods. But what we do not have is sort of a quantitative overview of which methods are being used how much by which projects. So this would be interesting, but this is something that we don't have. But Julia, you wanted to say something?
I can tell, for example, what we do right now. Social media monitoring is, of course, one of this, and we look at the sentiment of engagement in our social media. Is this topic sparking a dialogue? Is this polarizing some thoughts on this specific topic? Or after the events, we try to make to our audience just one simple question. For example, what was most useful for you today? So we get one answer. This is good for the audience not to answer a big questionnaire, and for us not to evaluate too much, but to have this spot insight on the topic and on our event. But the most important tool to measure awareness and perception of our institution, of our brand, of our activities is the image survey we run among the population. And we did this every 5 years, and this is a very big gap. So we are planning to reduce this gap to every 2 years. And there we ask if in the survey if they know which research institution they are in the region, if they know Lineberg Research Center, and this is a very important point, how do they get the information? So we have a direct feedback on which activity of science communication works best to reach the audience.
Thank you very much. Also for these sort of very practice-focused insight. I think this is interesting for a lot of people here in the room. Mikkel?
Yeah, as I said, I work with science education, so we do science camps for young people, and we follow them for 3 years after the science camp. So we actually come back to them after 1 year and 1 year. So we follow both in the quantitative. So in terms of do they change? What sort of studies do they choose after they finish secondary school? And also we can make interviews and ask them to reflect back on the input that we gave them when they were in these science camps to see did it have an impact or did something else have an impact. So, but it's extremely consuming in terms of resources, and there's a lot of practical stuff of tracking people and GDPR and stuff like that. But you can do that with a small population. You can actually go deep into detail and follow them for a couple of years. So that is on a very small scale. So that's how evaluation is on the small scale. You can go deep. On the big scale, you can go not so deep.
Wow, thank you. I think all researchers' eyes just started to gleam by hearing about that kind of data, following people for 3 years. That's really, really impressive. Very, very interesting, I think. Mike, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, no, it was not it. The curious question, Mikkel, do you publish the results?
Sorry, do we what?
Do you publish the
Oh,
results?
yes.
I am. Is it journal papers or reports, or what's the
This
form
is
you do that?
these are reports because this is not research. This is still just evaluation. We do it together with we have an external evaluator, the Evaluation Institute for Education in Denmark, and they just published a first report for the first year, and then they will publish two more for the coming 2 years, and then we will see the long-term impacts. It was actually the foundation who gave us money, who insisted on doing this. So it was on their initiative, and they donated some money to do that because it's a bit expensive to do it. So yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is a really, really cool example for all of us here to hear about. Wiebke.
Yes, I'd like to give an example that we're experimenting with at the moment. We write impact stories. We have, for example, a fellowship program, and then we just interviewed our fellows round about a year after they took part in our fellowship program. We do this together with an agency, so you need to have a bit of financial resources, of course. And it's not a big report, it's just 3 pages, but we gain insight on what we really created for an impact for this people, but also for their environment, in their environment. And then we gonna use it to send it to our curatorium, to our I don't know the English word for that, like to our
Advisory board, something
advisory
like an
board, for
advisory board.
example, also to the public. We put it on our websites, and I'm really looking forward to see how how this works. But we had very interesting insights, only from a very short and brief interview, and then we put it into a nice story. It's not simply data, but we make it very fun to read. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. This is also a really interesting example to hear about. Should we have one last question from the chat, maybe?
I think there's a lot of need or a lot of curiosity about the report, Mikkel, that you just told us about. Maybe you can share the link. And also, Ako, I don't know if the toolbox is already online, but some people asked for that. So
It will probably be launched quite publicly once it goes online. Sure,
So-
we'll hear
Yeah.
about it.
maybe
We're
we
happy to
can.
share it as well.
Yes, exactly. But I think that are the questions at the moment. A lot of
Okay.
I can just say that the first one is the least interesting one, is just published because that's more or less what happened just now. The upcoming years will be a lot more interesting, of course. So it's I'll happy to share it, and you can work on your Danish language to understand it. And but I'll put a link in the chat.
Yes, thank you. And then Wiebke, you're also being asked to, if it's possible, put the impact stories into the chat. So I think we've already seen quite a lot of good practices today, which is already an achievement, I think, because this is something we also talk about when we talk about standards.
They're not ready yet, but as soon as they're ready, I can somehow, well, you can check our website then.
Yes, or maybe Julia and I can think about whether from the impact unit we're going to make a little sort of post where we just compile all the resources once they're online. That might be interesting. So time-wise, this gives us time for a bit of more of an extensive last round, because I did want to ask all of you that what you take away from the discussion today, because I think we started, at least from our roundtable discussions, as you also saw in my presentation, with a bit, I think, as Mikkel put it, more mechanistic view of standard. So should there be a standard procedure to evaluate, and then standard measures, and everyone does the same, and then, you know, everyone conforms and there's comparability. And at least in my mind, we've shifted quite a lot in the discussion today, and I have then in the end talked about very different things that we could standardize, and we've talked a lot about also community building. So this was quite of a leading question now, because now I already said what I sort of saw in the discussion, or what maybe I'm going to take away today. But I do want to make a round and ask all of you what you maybe learned today, or whether today made you think differently about some aspects of evaluation. And maybe I will start with Kenneth, if you want to share.
Yeah, I think that for me, there's a lot for me that I've learned today, considering that, I think it's the first year that I've met a lot of people in Europe, specifically regarding science communication, which was not the case when I studied science communication in Australia. But with that in mind, I think that there is a ways to go, and I think that's a good thing, because at this point, we can be part of the conversation and sort of coming together and sort of building towards the gold standard that we're discussing. I don't know if it would necessarily be very similar to what we see in most communication studies, simply because of the various different facets that are involved in science communication and the way it intersects with different types of aspects. So I think that's one thing that we need to be cognizant about. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, if, let's say, from this conversation, if we're moving towards, in a sense, a sort of like a common foundation or common platform to talk about science communication evaluation. And if that necessarily necessitates a gold standard, perhaps that could be of something of major use for all of us in other parts of the world. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much again for joining us today. That was really valuable. And I think we all know that today can only be the start of a conversation. It was pretty clear we wouldn't standardize evaluation today in this round, but I think it is a really great start. I will hand over to Julia. What are your main takeaways from today?
There's an analogy that comes always to my mind, has come to my mind in this past minutes, and it's the analogy between evaluation and parenthood. Parents, yes, because parents, they need advice and recommendations about how to raise kids, but then they take them and raise it with their own ideas. So this is pretty much what we feel as practitioners, or what I feel. We need the guidelines, definitely, and they should be maybe thinking about small scale standards, as Mikkel said, and large scale standards, low effort standards, high effort standards. So we have very a comprehensive guideline how we can orient ourselves through this jungle of standardization, and to get a very clear idea, and then make this advice for ourselves, and raise our babies, which are our science communication project and activities. So this is what is my takeaway. And I want to say I'm very, very happy to start this conversation, and I definitely dig much further into it. And I want to take my whole team with that, because I think talking also about responsibilities it's important that the whole team is on the same page, and the evaluation culture goes in the institution and in the teams, and we all work together on that.
Thank you very much.
For all the input.
Thank you. Thank you also for the nice analogy, which was appreciated in the chat as well. Mikkel, what about you? What are you taking away from the
Well,
session today?
it's so interesting to talk about this because we're all struggling to find the right way of doing it, and I don't think there is a right way of doing it. I think there are many, many ways of doing it according to what is it actually you want to achieve, and I think that was very clear from this discussion, and it's very inspiring for me to be a part of it, and it just underlines, I think, that we really need to talk, and I think it would be very valuable if you do this again, also to invite somebody who could talk a little bit more specific about some cases, what went good, what went bad. That would be very helpful to see. I could certainly think of many ways where I did something very bad in terms of evaluation. So we need to learn from each other, and we need transparency and honesty. And I think this is a very good start. So once again, thank you so much, and congratulations with the birthday, and thank you for this great initiative.
Thank you very much for joining us and your contributions. And I think this idea of continuing the conversation, having more practice-focused inputs, that will be really interesting in the future. I agree. Mike, last thoughts on today.
Yes. First of all, mirroring what has been said, thanks for having me and for inviting me. I take the conversation that we had today, but also the impact unit at Wissenschaft im Dialog and Coalesce's upcoming toolbook as an indicator of something good, which is raising awareness for the issue of evaluation in science communication. And that's a good thing, an important first step to actually have this in mind, that this is something you should think about and ideally do if you can or where you can. Second thing, the standard, my perception of the gold standard did not change much, I think, but because I didn't fully agree with the presentation early on, or I had a different understanding of the presentation early on, but relabeling it, I think Arko said that, Mikkel said it as well, as principles, guide, whatever. Thinking about the semantics more is probably helpful because the standard term may lead on the wrong path here. And maybe last point, I like the parenthood example or analogy also. Also for an additional reason, I think. Parenthood does not mean finding everything cool that your kid does. Parenthood means socialization and education as well. And on a systemic level, that is important in evaluation as well, right? It's not about telling everybody that what you're doing is good. As in any field, in the science communication field, there are great and good and less great projects. And evaluation, the aim is improving the field, I think, in general. So stressing that is important as well. And with the parenthood analogy, that will stick with me, certainly.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, over to you, Aku. What do you take away from the session today?
Thank you. I take away the same thing I took away from those stakeholder meetings at Quest project, where we got different people around the table, and you could see that even within this hour or 2 hours, kind of the mindset or you created new knowledge, you created new understanding. So talking is always, in this case, productive. We need to talk more, as Mikkel said in the beginning about this. This will take us further. And from the discussion, I really sensed that there is a hunger for not to say standards, but good practices, good examples. And on the other hand, we see that there is actually a lot out there that is not accessible yet, that exists in people's heads, that exists in institutional reports, materials that are not easily accessible. So it would be really, really helpful if we kind of could provide better access to what is being already done out there, because there is a lot and there is a lot of good stuff.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. And I think Coalesce will, of course, really contribute to this, at least in the European context, to make this visible. So, right on time, this only leaves me to say thank you. And especially thank you to our panelists. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your thoughts and ideas and experiences. This was really valuable, and especially having this international context was very, very interesting for us. Thank you for Wiebke for joining us, for the kind words of welcome. Thank you to Simon from Wissenschaft im Dialog for the technical hosting, and Julia from the Impact Unit, especially for co-organizing, but also, of course, the whole team of the Impact Unit for organizing this. And thank you to all the participants for joining us today, discussing with us. Have a great rest of the day.